Welcome to Revenge Stories. I stared at the message glowing on my phone, my fingers tightening around the device until my knuckles turned white. Flying to Rome with my lover. Have fun being poor. James always had a flair for cruelty. But this? This was a masterpiece of betrayal. A single sentence, carved out of arrogance, dripping with malice. He didn't just want to leave me, he wanted me to suffer, to sit in the ruins of the life he'd methodically dismantled, to choke on the ashes of what I once believed was love. I let out a slow breath, the muscles in my jaw clenching as I forced myself to stay calm. The pain, the humiliation, it was all there, boiling just beneath the surface. But above all, there was something else. Something colder, sharper, satisfaction. Because James, for all his careful planning, for all his smug superiority, had no idea what was coming. I glanced at the laptop perched on the dashboard. The screen split into multiple live feeds of JFK Airport. Tiny figures moved in a synchronized dance of oblivion, unaware that among them was a man walking straight into his downfall. The irony was almost poetic. James thought he was in control. He thought he was the one pulling the strings. He had no idea those strings had already been wrapped around his neck. 6 months ago, I never would have suspected him. Maybe that's the worst part. The way I let myself believe in him. The way I looked at James and saw a partner, a man I could trust, someone who whispered dreams of forever in my ear, while his hands were already reaching for the knife he'd plant in my back. I should have noticed the signs, the late nights at the office, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in my financial records. At first, I'd told myself it was stress. Maybe he was taking on a bigger role at work, handling a difficult client. Maybe he just needed space. But then the withdrawals started. Small at first, easy to miss if you weren't looking. But I was looking. And once I started, I didn't stop. James was smart. That was the problem. He wasn't sloppy. He wasn't reckless. He was calculated, methodical, precise. But the thing about a man who believes himself untouchable is that he stops checking for knives in the dark. So I let him think I was blind. I let him believe I was just another woman, too, in love to question, too naive to understand, too weak to fight back. I let him win, right up until the moment I started playing my own game. I met with the FBI the same day I found the first red flag. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. I just handed over the documents and asked them how much they needed to bury him. And now, 6 months later, I was parked outside JFK, watching him strut through the terminal, my name already erased from his future. He thought he had taken everything. Our savings, my security, my dignity. He thought I'd be on my knees when he left, scrambling for scraps, a helpless, broken woman. He had no idea the accounts he drained weren't real. He had no idea the emergency fund he thought he'd stolen was a front I'd set up with the FBI to track every cent he touched. And he sure as hell had no idea that the woman clinging to his arm, the one he believed to be his mistress, was one of the best undercover operatives in the country. Target is approaching security checkpoint. A voice crackled through my earpiece. Agent Catherine Torres, or, as James knew her, Amanda. I watched the screen, saw them moving together, his hand possessively resting on her waist. My stomach twisted, but not from jealousy, from rage. James had never touched me like that in public. Not once. He'd always been calculated in his affection, careful with displays of emotion. But with her, with the woman he thought he was running away with, he was open, carefree. I pressed my nails into my palm until I felt the sting. None of that mattered. Not anymore. He was 2 minutes from losing everything. He's likely carrying the backup drive with all the transaction records, I murmured, voice steady. Don't let him dump it. Copy that. James kept walking, oblivious to the walls closing in around him. He was confident, relaxed, ready to board his flight to a new life, where I was nothing but a footnote in his history. Except James wasn't going to Rome. James wasn't going anywhere. I picked up my phone and typed out a message. Just a single sentence. Simple, elegant, precise. Maybe you should talk to the police officer behind you first. I hit send and watched. James's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down, expecting something sweet, maybe another cruel taunt from me. a final nail in the coffin of my despair. And then his face changed. It was subtle, a flicker, a hesitation, but I saw it. The moment realization coiled around his throat and squeezed. He turned, scanning the terminal, eyes darting, posture stiffening. He knew. Too late. All units in position, Torres's voice hummed through my ear. We've got eyes on all exits. James moved faster now, walking briskly toward the gate, gripping the handle of his briefcase like it was a lifeline. His mistress kept pace beside him, her grip tightening on his arm just enough to keep him close. He didn't realize she wasn't trying to comfort him. She was making sure he couldn't run. I exhaled slowly, watching as my husband, the man who had stolen everything from me, who had laughed while doing it, stepped straight into the trap he had built with his own hands. James had thought this was his grand escape, his victory. He had no idea. It was his reckoning. James always believed he was smarter than everyone else. It was his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. I learned this early in our marriage, when he started making decisions on my behalf, like I was some accessory to his life rather than a partner. He would smile, condescending and patient, whenever I questioned something. Don't worry, Natalie. I know what I'm doing. And for a while, I let him think I believed him. But now, as I watched him from my car, scrambling through JFK like a caged animal, scenting the noose tightening around his throat, I thought back to the first moment I knew. 6 months ago, I stood in our shared office, staring at his laptop screen while he showered. It had been a moment of instinct, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. James had been growing distant, but not in the way of a man merely falling out of love. No, this was something else. A careful calculation, a pulling away like a strategist setting up a battlefield. So I had followed my instincts. I had opened his laptop, and I had seen the first flicker of what would become his undoing. A set of offshore account transfers. At first, they seemed small, insignificant. Then I noticed the frequency, the patterns, the missing millions. I didn't breathe, didn't move. I just stood there, the weight of the realization pressing down on me like a lead blanket. James wasn't just being distant. He was stealing, and he was getting ready to leave me behind. The weeks that followed were a careful, meticulous act of survival. I had to pretend I didn't know. I had to smile when he kissed my cheek, had to nod along when he casually mentioned consolidating our finances. It just makes sense, Natalie. We're married. We should share everything. The lies slipped off his tongue so easily. I wondered how long he had been practicing them. Had he ever truly loved me? Or had I simply been the convenient, respectable wife to mask his corruption? I played my part well. I let him think I was oblivious. But I was watching, learning, tracking every single move he made. Then I went to the FBI. It took less than an hour for them to confirm what I had already begun to piece together. James wasn't just dipping his hands into company funds. He was orchestrating one of the most sophisticated embezzlement schemes Morton and Blake had ever seen. Millions were siphoned off into shell companies, funneled through multiple accounts before vanishing into the abyss. James had thought of everything, almost everything. What he hadn't accounted for was me. Target is hesitating. Torres's voice crackled in my ear. He's checking his phone again. I think he knows something is off. I leaned forward, watching James through the terminal security feed. His fingers drummed against his briefcase, the one that once belonged to my father. The one I knew he had filled with just enough evidence to bury himself, if the right hands got a hold of it. Agent Torres was moving with him, her hand resting lightly against his arm, the very image of a doting mistress. He had no idea she was leading him straight to his doom. I had watched James manipulate people for years. I had seen how he got what he wanted, how he twisted words, how he played the long game. He believed himself untouchable. I almost pitied him. Almost. 6 weeks before today, I set the final phase of the plan in motion. James had always underestimated me. He saw me as his blind, trusting wife, someone who lived in the world of domestic simplicity while he played in the real world, the world of power, control, and deception. That's why he never noticed when I started feeding him false information. I let him think he had found my emergency savings. I let him believe I was scrambling, desperately shifting money between accounts in a futile attempt to salvage something before he drained me dry. And James? James did exactly what I expected him to do. He took the bait. I watched as he transferred every last dollar from what he believed to be my personal savings into an offshore account, an account that, unbeknownst to him, the FBI was already monitoring. Everything was in place. All I had to do was wait. James had always been predictable in his arrogance. That's why, as I sat in my car outside JFK, I knew exactly what was going through his mind. He was recalculating, weighing his options, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I picked up my phone, a smile curling at the edge of my lips as I typed another message. You should hold on to that briefcase tightly, James. It's the only thing keeping you from hitting the ground any faster. I hit send and watched as, on the feed, he stiffened. His grip tightened on the briefcase. Then he started walking faster, right into the waiting arms of the FBI. James always thought he was the one controlling the pieces on the board, but he never realized he was the pawn all along. James's steps quickened, the briefcase clutched in his hand like a lifeline, his knuckles white against the worn leather. I could see it, the panic threading through his movements, the tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders hunched just slightly, as if expecting a blow. Good. He was finally beginning to understand. I leaned forward in my car, eyes locked on the security feed streaming on my laptop. Every camera in JFK had turned into a window into his fear. He moved like a man trapped in a burning house. Except the fire wasn't around him. It was inside him. Target is approaching the final checkpoint. Torres's voice murmured through my earpiece. He knows something is wrong, but he's still moving forward. Exactly where we need him. James's gaze darted around the terminal, searching for an out, any out. But there wasn't one. Not today. Not ever. I let my fingers hover over my phone screen before typing another message. The final push to send him over the edge. They're watching. Every step you take. Every lie you've told. You're not escaping, James. You're walking into your grave. I pressed send. The effect was instantaneous. On the screen, James froze mid-step. His head jerked up like a puppet with its strings cut, his face draining of color as he read the words. He turned slowly, as if expecting to see me standing there, watching him from the shadows. I almost wished I was. I wanted to see his expression when he truly realized that he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. He moved again, this time more erratic. His hand went to Torres's arm, gripping her wrist, his mouth forming words I didn't need to hear to understand. He was trying to get them out of there, trying to retreat. A mistake. Torres let her eyes widen, feigning concern, but I saw the flicker of victory beneath her carefully crafted mask. She nodded, placing her hand over his in what looked like reassurance. I knew better. She was keeping him right where we needed him. Security was already on alert. The moment he tried to leave, they would stop him. And if he ran? Well, that would just be more fun to watch. Target is requesting to step out of line. Torres's voice buzzed in my ear, calm, composed. Do we let him squirm a little longer? I considered it. The part of me that had spent months playing the role of the helpless wife wanted to drag this moment out, to let him taste the fear he had so carelessly served me. But I had bigger plans for James. No, I said finally, my voice like ice. End it. James made it exactly 3 steps before 2 uniformed officers stepped into his path. I watched as he skidded to a stop, his confidence cracking like thin ice. His mouth moved, his expression shifting between irritation and feigned confusion. But the officers didn't budge. One of them gestured toward his briefcase. I couldn't hear his words, but I already knew them. Sir, we need you to come with us. James turned to Torres, expecting what? Support? A way out? Her face was a mask of well-practiced shock, her lips parting in an almost convincing display of concern. What's going on? She asked, voice laced with just the right amount of distress. James's head snapped back to the officers. He wasn't charming his way out of this. He wasn't scamming his way out of this. He was caught, and he knew it. My hands clenched into fists as I watched the moment I had been waiting for, the unraveling, the exact second where he realized the walls weren't just closing in. They were already sealed shut. And then, just as I was about to let myself savor the victory, my phone buzzed. A new message From James. I know what you did. I have proof. If I go down, you're going with me. The world tilted. I inhaled sharply, my grip tightening around the phone. The bastard. He was bluffing. He had to be. I had been too careful, too meticulous. Every move I made was calculated. Every document, every transfer, every leak to the FBI. It was all airtight. I had covered my tracks, hadn't I? And then, as if the universe itself wanted to twist the knife deeper, a second message arrived. Check your email. Now. My pulse pounded against my ribs as I fumbled for my laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as I opened my inbox. And there it was. A single file attachment, Thomas Bennett Project files. My father's name. A cold dread settled in my gut. My mind raced. No, no, this wasn't possible. James didn't know. He couldn't know. With a shaking breath, I clicked the file, and my world shattered. Emails, transaction records, meeting minutes dating back 15 years, all linked to my father, to Morton and Blake. The pattern was undeniable. The same offshore transfers, the same shell companies, the same blueprint James had been using. A blueprint my father had created. No, 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 no. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. My father had been a good man, a man of integrity. The very reason I had pursued forensic accounting, the reason I had spent my life fighting corruption was because of him. But the documents, they didn't lie, and James knew. My phone buzzed one last time, and I forced myself to look at the screen. Drop the charges, or everything about Thomas Bennett goes public. Your choice, darling. I squeezed my eyes shut, my nails digging into my palm, as the weight of it crushed me. James had played his game well, but I wasn't finished yet, because he had made one critical mistake. He thought he had all the pieces. He didn't know I had the one piece that could burn everything to the ground. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the files, my father's name glaring back at me like a cruel joke. My father, Thomas Bennett, had built the very blueprint James used to steal millions. My breath hitched, my chest tightening like a vice. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. James was bluffing. He had to be. But the evidence said otherwise. Emails, transaction logs, offshore account trails, all leading back to my father. The same meticulous pattern, the same tactics, the same crime. It was too perfect, too identical. James wasn't a mastermind. He had followed someone else's path. My father's. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My entire life had been shaped by my father's principles, his integrity, his belief that truth always triumphed over deceit. I had built my career hunting down men like James because of him. Had I been hunting my own blood all along? Another message from James flashed across my screen. TikTok, sweetheart. The FBI won't be so kind once they find out the real origin of this scheme. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to think. James believed he had me in a corner, that he had flipped the board and trapped me in my own game. He thought that because he had unearthed my father's past, I would cave, that I would let him walk away free. He had no idea just how wrong he was. I inhaled deeply, pushing the storm of emotions to the back of my mind. There was no time for grief, no time for doubt. James had given me the final piece of the puzzle without even realizing it. Now, I just had to find the real truth buried beneath the lies. I didn't call the FBI. Not yet. I needed to know why. I drove straight to my father's old office at Morton and Blake, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel with each mile. The place had been repurposed into a storage room after his passing, the corporate machine erasing him like he had never existed. They had packed away his things, shoved them into dusty cabinets, pretending he had never mattered. But my father had been a meticulous man. He wouldn't have left loose ends. I needed to find what James hadn't. Pushing past old desks and forgotten files, I found what I was looking for. My father's ancient wooden desk. It had been too heavy to move, too insignificant for anyone to bother with. But I remembered. I ran my fingers along the underside of the drawer, searching for the hidden catch I had seen him use 1,000 times. Click. The small compartment slid open, revealing a single USB drive. My breath hitched. I plugged it into my laptop, my heart hammering as I opened the files. And that's when I saw it. My father hadn't been the mastermind of the scheme. He had been the whistleblower. My eyes darted across the screen. He had documented everything, not just the fraud, but the people behind it. Names, dates, transfers, executives, board members, the real orchestrators. They had forced him into the scheme, threatened him, and when he tried to gather evidence, they silenced him the only way they knew how. I clenched my jaw, fury burning through my veins. James had been so smug, so certain he had found my weakness. But he had only handed me the key to destroying every single person involved. I picked up my phone and dialed Agent Torres. Natalie? Her voice was sharp, alert. We've got James in holding. What's going on? I need to see you. Now. This case just got bigger. Much bigger. 30 minutes later, I sat across from Torres in a secured briefing room at the FBI's Manhattan office. The USB drive lay between us, a time bomb waiting to detonate. Torres plugged it into her laptop, her face unreadable as she scrolled through the files. Then her expression hardened. Holy shit, she muttered. This isn't just James. This is everyone. I nodded, gripping my hands together to keep them steady. They used my father. He wasn't a criminal. He was their fall guy. And when he tried to do the right thing, they buried him. Torres exhaled sharply. This changes everything. I looked her straight in the eye. James thought he had leverage over me. He thought he could blackmail me into letting him go. But what he doesn't know, what none of them know, is that I now have the power to dismantle this entire operation. Torres studied me for a long moment before nodding. We move tonight. We're not just taking down James, we're bringing the whole empire down. A slow, determined smile curled at the corner of my lips. Good, because I wasn't just here for revenge anymore. I was here to finish what my father started. I pulled up my phone, ignoring the missed calls from James's lawyer. Instead, I typed one final message to the man who thought he could control me. Checkmate. And then I hit send. The moment I pressed send, a storm began to unfold. James thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought his leverage, his so-called trump card, would break me. But he had no idea he had just armed me with something far more dangerous. The truth. The real architects of the crime, the men who had built this scheme long before James ever set foot in Morton and Blake, were about to feel the weight of a reckoning they never saw coming. And I was going to be the one to bring it. Torres wasted no time. We have enough to open an extensive investigation, she said, scrolling through my father's files, her face grim. This isn't just fraud. This is organized crime on a corporate level. Money laundering, bribery, conspiracy. And if your father's files are correct, there are politicians involved. I clenched my jaw. James walked into a machine that already existed. He didn't create it, he just got greedy. Torres nodded. Exactly. He was small time compared to what's really at play here. But you just handed us the entire playbook. A plan was already forming in my mind. James is going to sing like a damn canary when he realizes what's coming for him. Torres smirked. Let's go remind him exactly how much trouble he's in. The FBI's Manhattan office wasn't built for spectacle. It was cold, clinical, designed to make men like James feel exactly as small and powerless as they truly were. When we entered the interrogation room, he was sitting at the metal table, his hands cuffed, his usual air of smug superiority noticeably absent. He looked up, eyes narrowing when he saw me. Well, he sneered. Come to watch me rot? Or did you finally realize we're in the same boat? I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I just pulled out my phone, opened my email, and slid it across the table to him. James's face twisted in confusion until his gaze dropped to the screen. And then he froze. He scrolled through the documents with shaking fingers, his expression shifting from confusion to realization to pure terror. You didn't know, I said softly. Did you? His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, still staring at the files, the names, the transactions, the indisputable evidence that he was nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. I leaned forward, dropping my voice to a whisper. You were never in control, James. They let you think you were running the show. But the moment you became a liability, you were disposable. He finally looked up at me, his face pale. This isn't real. Torres crossed her arms. Oh, it's real. And guess what? Your powerful friends? The ones you thought would protect you? She leaned down until she was eye level with him. They're going down with you. James's breath hitched. For the first time since this had all begun, he was afraid. I should have felt pity. I didn't. Torres and I left him alone to stew in his own fear. We knew what would happen next. He would beg for a deal. He would turn on everyone to save himself. And we would let him. I sat in Torres's office, staring out the window as the city buzzed below, my mind still spinning. "He'll talk," Torres said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Men like James always do." I exhaled, shaking my head. "It's not just about James anymore." Torres studied me. "No, it's not." I turned to her, my voice steady. "I want to be there when they go down." She raised an eyebrow. "You planning on joining the FBI?" I smirked. "Something like that. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. And I wasn't done yet." James cracked faster than I expected. The moment he realized he wasn't just facing a fraud case, but that he had been a disposable piece in a much larger game, his resolve shattered like glass. His ego had always been his greatest weakness. And now, faced with the truth that he had never truly been in control, the fear in his eyes was almost satisfying. He took the deal. Torres and her team wasted no time. Within hours, subpoenas were being drafted, arrest warrants finalized. The dominoes had begun to fall, and I was right there, watching every single one tumble. This wasn't just about James anymore. This was about burning down the empire that had tried to bury my father. The media explosion was instantaneous. The next morning, headlines blared across every news station. Massive fraud scandal unraveled at Morton, and Blake Dawson's implicated high-profile executives under investigation in multi-million-dollar scheme inside the corporate conspiracy. How a whistleblower's daughter brought down a dynasty. I sat in Torres's office, watching the footage roll in, CEOs being led away in handcuffs, government officials trying to duck from reporters, shareholders scrambling, the company's stock plummeting in real time. I had spent months feeling powerless, feeling like I was one step behind. But now, I was the one pulling the strings. Torres walked in, tossing a file onto the desk in front of me. "It's done. James gave us everything. Wire transfers, meeting notes, recorded calls. These men were untouchable for decades, Natalie. Not anymore." I picked up the file, flipping through the pages, each one more damning than the last. They had ruined lives, stolen from people who trusted them. And my father? He had tried to stop them. They had silenced him. I clenched my jaw. "What happens now?" Torres smirked. "Now? We watch them burn." One by one, the giants fell. Morton and Blake's CEO, Harold Wright, was the first to go down, led out of his luxury penthouse in cuffs. He had been the architect of the original scheme, pulling strings from behind the scenes, manipulating the board, using my father as a puppet. The CFO, Leonard Henshaw, was next, caught trying to flee the country with a suitcase full of untraceable cash. He didn't even make it past airport security before he was swarmed by federal agents. Then came the politicians, the ones who had protected Morton and Blake, shielding them from investigations for years in exchange for kickbacks. Senators, regulators, even a judge. They all fell like dominoes. I sat in my apartment, watching the coverage, drinking my victory one headline at a time. And James? James sat in a 6 by 8 foot prison cell, facing 20 years for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. He had traded everything: his money, his power, his freedom, just for the slim chance of survival. But the truth was, James had already lost the moment he betrayed me. A month later, I stood outside my father's grave, the cool wind brushing against my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by uncertainty, the guilt, the questions, the endless wondering if I had missed something, if I could have saved him. It was all gone now. I had found the truth, and I had delivered justice. "They didn't win, Dad," I whispered. "They tried. They thought they could erase you, but they were wrong." I placed a single white lily on the grave, exhaling slowly. "I finished what you started." The wind howled through the cemetery, but I felt lighter. This was closure. This was peace. 2 weeks later, Torres called me into her office. "We have an offer for you," she said, sliding a document across the desk. Come work for us. Financial Crimes Division. You have the instincts, the skills, and, let's be honest, you just took down one of the biggest fraud rings in the country. I stared at the document, my heart pounding. It made sense. I had spent years in forensic accounting, tracking fraud, hunting down corporate corruption. But this? This was bigger. This was real power. You don't have to decide now, Torres said. But something tells me you'd be good at it. I smirked. Yeah? She leaned back. Oh, I know you would. I looked down at the contract. I had spent so much time reacting, fighting, surviving. Now I had the chance to go on the offensive. I picked up the pen, and I signed. 6 months later, I walked through the halls of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, my badge clipped to my belt, my heels clicking against the marble floor. A new case file sat in my hands, another corporate fraud investigation. Another empire built on lies. I smirked to myself. They never learn, and now, I was the one hunting them. 6 months into my new life at the FBI, I thought I had seen it all. Corporate fraudsters, insider traders, high-powered criminals who thought they were untouchable every day. I peeled back the layers of their deception, watching their carefully constructed worlds collapse like sandcastles under a rising tide. I had taken down Morton and Blake, shattered a corrupt empire, and avenged my father's name. But I wasn't done yet, because there was one loose end left to tie up. James had been sentenced to 20 years, and for a while, I had let myself believe that was enough. That seeing him locked in a concrete box, stripped of his power, was the ending he deserved. But then came the whispers, a quiet conversation in the hallway, a slip of a report left on my desk. Torres's hesitant glance when she mentioned a potential breach. James had been talking, not to the FBI, not in official capacity, but to someone else, someone on the outside. And suddenly, I realized James wasn't just a fallen king. He was trying to crawl back onto the throne. I spent weeks combing through reports, tracking anomalies. At first, it was nothing. A few flagged communications, an unusual influx of visitors requesting meetings with him at the prison. Small things, too small. But then, the pattern emerged. Anonymous wire transfers. Payments made to lawyers with no active cases. A shell company registered under a false identity, transferring assets that shouldn't exist. James wasn't just talking. He was rebuilding. I slammed my laptop shut, adrenaline pounding in my veins. No, I had buried him. I had burned his empire to the ground, salted the earth so nothing could grow. I would not let him rise again. It was time for a visit. I walked into the prison under the guise of an official case review. The guards barely glanced at me as I signed in another badge, another government agent here to talk business. They led me down the stark, lifeless corridors to the visiting room, where James sat waiting in an orange jumpsuit, still managing to look infuriatingly composed. He leaned back, the corners of his mouth curling upward as I took the seat across from him. Natalie, he drawled, as if we were old friends catching up. I was wondering when you'd show up. I didn't rise to the bait. You're sloppy, James. His smirk faltered, but only for a second. Sloppy? I'm in prison, sweetheart. What could I possibly be doing? I slid a folder across the table. He didn't touch it, but I saw the tension in his jaw as he glanced down. I traced the accounts, I said, my voice calm. The wire transfers, the lawyer payments. You're trying to rebuild, and you think no one's watching. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. And you think you're so much better than me, don't you? I smiled. No, James. I know I am. For the first time since I walked in, real anger flashed across his face. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. I will ruin you. Again. You think prison is the worst place you can be? You have no idea what I can do to you. I will erase every single piece of leverage you have left. The people funding you? I will find them. The assets you're moving? I will freeze them. And the next time you make a mistake, James? The first tilted my head slightly, letting the words sink in. You won't have a deal to save you. James stared at me, his fingers tapping against the table, the smallest twitch betraying his frustration. For the first time, he looked trapped. Because he was. I stood up, pushing the folder closer to him. Read it. Let it sink in. And then ask yourself if you really want to play this game with me again. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, his voice stopped me. This isn't over, Natalie. I didn't turn around. Oh, I know. I glanced back just enough to meet his eyes, my smirk mirroring the one he had once used to gut me all those months ago. That's what makes it fun. I walked out of that prison with my head high, but I knew James wasn't done. Men like him never accepted defeat, not truly. It festered in them, gnawed at them, until they found a way to twist the knife back. He had lost the first round. Hell, he'd lost everything. His freedom, his empire, his reputation. But I saw it in his eyes, in the way his lips curled in quiet defiance as I walked away. He still thought he could win. That was his biggest mistake. The next few weeks, I kept my ears to the ground. Torres's team monitored financial trails, looking for any signs of James's hidden allies making moves. At first, it was quiet. Then the cracks started showing. A former Morton and Blake executive was found dead in his luxury condo, an apparent suicide. A little too convenient. A junior analyst who had testified against the company disappeared overseas, his flight booked under a fake name. Running scared. And then, one night, I came home to find a manila envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, no markings, just my name, printed in bold, black ink. I shut the door behind me, heart hammering as I peeled it open. Inside was a single photograph. Me, sitting at my desk in the FBI office, taken through a window, my stomach twisted into knots. I flipped the photo over. One line was scrawled in neat, familiar handwriting. Still watching, sweetheart. James. My blood went cold, but I didn't panic. I sat on my couch, staring at that note for a long time, letting the weight of it settle in, letting the anger sink its claws into me. James wasn't going to stop, not until he was forced to, not until I made him. I drove straight to Torres's office, my grip tight on the steering wheel. She was already waiting when I walked in, a file open on her desk. "We have a problem," she said, sliding the folder toward me. I glanced down. Surveillance photos, bank statements, a fresh network of offshore accounts that had James's fingerprints all over them. "He's laundering money from the inside," I murmured, flipping through the pages. Torres nodded grimly. "He's moving funds through intermediaries, ex-employees, old contacts. But there's more." She tapped a highlighted section in the report. "He's trying to buy his way out." My head snapped up. A prison break? Torres exhaled sharply. More like a legal maneuver. A judge, deep in someone's pocket, quietly reducing his sentence. It's not official yet, but if we don't stop it, James could be a free man in less than a year. I clenched my fists. No, that wasn't going to happen. Torres studied me, her sharp eyes assessing. "We need hard evidence to shut this down. And we need it now." I thought of the note, the photo left at my door. James wanted me to know he wasn't finished, that he was still playing the game. He had just made the mistake of telling me exactly where to find him. The next night, I waited outside the prison in an unmarked car, parked just out of sight. Torres had pulled some strings, arranged for us to monitor any unusual activity surrounding James. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a shady lawyer, maybe a bribe getting passed through a visitor. Instead, I saw something far worse. A prison guard, exiting through the employee lot, carrying a burner phone. I grabbed my camera, zooming in as he leaned against a wall, dialing a number. My phone vibrated a second later. A forwarded transcript from our wiretap on James's prison calls. The guard's number was the one James had called earlier that day. I listened to the recording. James's voice, smooth as ever, slipped through the static. "Everything is in place. Just be ready when I give the signal." My pulse thundered. This wasn't just a legal play. James was planning something bigger. I hit the call button. Torres answered on the first ring. "We've got him," I said. "But we need to move, now." The storm was coming, and I was ready to bring it straight to James's door. James was planning something bigger. I could feel it in my bones. His arrogance had always been his downfall, but this was desperation. He had spent months rotting in that cell, and now he thought he'd found a way out. A way to rebuild. I wasn't going to let that happen. Torres and I moved fast. The wiretap confirmed that James was orchestrating something from the inside. The burner phone in the guard's hands, the coded message. Everything is in place. Just be ready when I give the signal. That wasn't a bluff. That was a countdown. We needed more. A recording wasn't enough to take down an entire operation. We needed to catch him in the act. We staked out the prison, tracking the corrupt guard. He was careful, never used the same route twice, never took calls in the same place. But no one is untouchable. It took 4 days. 4 days before he made a mistake. I was in an unmarked car, watching from a distance as he slipped out of the prison's back entrance and into a black sedan. Torres was already inside the restaurant across the street, positioned near the window, pretending to nurse a coffee while keeping her recording device aimed at the target. The guard pulled out his burner phone, his face illuminated in the dim light of the parking lot. I zoomed in with my camera. Got him. He dialed a number. Torres tapped her earpiece, listening in. Yeah, the guard said. He wants it done by next week. My stomach tightened. Done? Done WHAT? Torres leaned forward slightly, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. Who else is involved? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The guard's voice dropped lower. Judge is in. Money's been moved. We just need confirmation on the last transfer. I clenched my jaw. James was bribing a judge. A dirty deal for his release. Not just that he was buying protection. If he pulled this off, if the judge approved his reduced sentence and let him out early, he'd disappear. He'd be untouchable. I exchanged a glance with Torres. We had enough to move. Enough to shut this down before James slipped through the cracks. But I wanted more. I wanted James to know. I was the one who buried him for good. Torres pulled strings to get an emergency warrant. Within hours, we had enough federal backing to move on both the guard and the judge. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to see the moment James realized it was over. The next morning, I arrived at the prison under official FBI business. The warden let me through without question. James had no idea I was coming. They brought him into the interrogation room, shackled, the orange jumpsuit looking less like a punishment and more like exactly where he was always meant to be. He smirked when he saw me. Back so soon? I slid a folder across the table. Read it. He didn't move at first. Then, curiosity got the better of him. He opened it, his smirk faltering as he scanned the contents. The wire transcripts, the guard's confession, the judge's offshore accounts, seized. Every single thread of his plan, cut. I watched as the blood drained from his face. Slowly, I leaned in, my voice a quiet, deadly whisper. You really thought you could outplay me? His throat bobbed. He exhaled sharply through his nose, fingers tightening around the pages. You think this is over? Oh, I know it's over. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. The screen played live footage from a news report. Breaking. Federal judge indicted for conspiracy in Morton and Blake fraud case. Bribery scheme exposed. Multiple arrests underway. The camera cut to his judge. The one who was supposed to set him free. The one now being escorted into the back of an unmarked black SUV. James's breathing grew heavier, his fingers twitching. I picked up my phone and smirked. I'm sure you had a backup plan. You always do. But here's the thing, James. The first stood, leaning down so my voice was the last thing he'd hear before his world caved in. Every time you move, I'll be there. Every time you think you've won, I'll take it away from you. This is your life now. A losing game. His jaw clenched, his eyes burning with fury. I turned to leave. I had won. Again. And this time, there was no coming back.